listening to WCPT's To the Left with Samina and Shauna. Here's our hosts, Samina Mustafa and Shauna East.
Oh, that studio audience, gosh, I love it.
Thanks, everyone. We couldn't do this without you. Without the moral support.
Yeah, welcome back to the Left. My name's Samina Mustafa.
And I'm Shauna East.
And we are back on WCPT. We got a lot of talk. We've got a lot to talk about today. And we have some really awesome guests coming up. But we want to talk about some things that have been in the news. And why don't we start with what's happening in France?
So last night we were at the Houdoisie, right? Houdoisie. Ricardo Gamboa, who is working on the Amara campaign, that's how I know him, has been inviting me, and I've been out of the country and busy, but I finally got to go. And one of the topics that they brought up was the Yellow Vests protests in France, and I've been reading up on this. It's very exciting. What I wanted to mention was that a lot of the coverage that has been talking about it has been sort of correlating it with like Trumpism in a way. And the sources I've been reading are more like it's a working class uprising, that it's folks who are largely apolitical, a lot of people from like rural or just outside the cities who had to, drive further to get work or have precarious work situations like the gig economy kind of stuff. And there was a tax put on petrol, and the uprising started.
That's gasoline, America.
So the protests started, not as opposition to climate, saying climate change isn't happening or something like that, but because they thought, why are we having to pay for it, and why aren't the corporations paying for it, and sort of in protest to the regressive neoliberal policies of Macron. So I just wanted to start with that. And did you, have you heard anything about it? And
yeah, and it was interesting because Xavier Remy, who's part of the Houdoisie, brought up the fact that it is more rural. But the interesting distinction that he brought up was that those are folks that have taken to the streets, but they're not armed. There's not that sort of militia mentality there, and but yet they are, they're being vocal, and it's I think anytime folks see protest, it seems, and in the U.S. this is particularly problematic, is they aren't sure what to do with it. Whereas in France and other parts of the world, they're much more comfortable with the concept of dissent and protest. This concept of democracy is not foreign, and it's not scary. It's part of a lively democracy. If you go look at protests in Germany and other countries, there's literally hundreds of thousands of people in the street, and that happens all the time. South Korea, massive protests ended up impeaching a president. So this is something that happens all over the world, and we are in the U.S. have sort of lost that connection. It happened in the 60s, and it's sort of almost a historical artifact. And what's happening lately in the U.S. has been more more marches than protests.
Correct. And I was comparing it. So a lot of the folks marching or protesting in France, aren't a part of any political party. So you can't say this is the left protesting or the right. It's people that haven't really, but they're outraged by these taxes and things that are being pushed upon them. I was comparing it to the folks who were activated after Trump was elected. So like the Women's March. But I was saying, what if instead of going out in the streets, and I thought they were very politely protest. I've never been to a more respectful march where there was almost no chance. People were sort of like, yeah. Like there was that kind of sound like over the audience. And I was the crowd. And I was like, what if the Women's March had actual demands?
Right.
And, steps that they were going to take if demands weren't met is sort of what's I see happening in France. And things have turned, there has been some property damage, and the police there has been some violence over the past week there, so that's a little different than we see here, other than like the Charlottesville protests or Ferguson. Even the Occupy Chicago, when the police would shut it down, it was a little bit of an authoritarian, not a little bit, but an authoritarian element. So we're seeing that also in France.
Yeah, and the interesting thing I saw, someone shared a photograph of a woman taking a selfie in a Burger King while a protester was outside the window getting tear gassed. And I thought, this is peak, sort of peak 2018, peak capitalism. And I just thought, wow, that's powerful. And that is scary to folks. I mean, it is, and we talk about tear gas and the fact that we've had members of the caravan getting tear gassed, and everyone said, this has never happened. Like, no, it happened in Ferguson and all the places you mentioned, and all these protests where, again, it was a case of protesters who really had a demand. It was very clear. And in some cases, it was a climate issue, whether it was Standing Rock, in cases like that. And we aren't, there's a disconnect between what the issues are and how severe the situation is right now. That's why I'm so excited that folks like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ayanna Pressley and Rashida Tlaib are bringing up things like the Green New Deal and really pushing for it and peeling back the curtain and saying, look, all these corporations who have been getting, the tax breaks and the beneficial treatment and the deregulation, it's all affecting our water, our air, our planet. And it's past the point of not acting. We have to do something.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to mention, because Anthony Rogers Wright reminds me to say this every time the phrase Green New Deal gets brought up, that the New Deal was not that good for Black people. So he wants to talk about changing the name.
No, absolutely. And even just something like housing. I mean, in many ways, things like that's absolutely right. Thank you, Anthony Rogers Wright, for reminding us. But I've read about this, a lot of this recently. I want to say it's when we say, I've said a New Deal, I would say whether it's an inclusive New Deal, all of these things have to be put in their historical context. I think that's what people are sort of, they're sort of forgetting that, okay, we've got all these racialized policies, and to deny them, even today. And so it's like, to deny that is kind of why we, meaning the left, have to be educated on what policies were inclusive and which were racist.
Mm-hmm. So, and then the NTA, we're going to talk about to a couple folks involved.
Yeah, the National Teachers Academy, which is a really exciting case. Do
you want to give the intro to that? Because I think they're on. So.
Yeah, we were going to bring them on in a few minutes, but so I actually met some of the parents and the community rep for the local school council at National Teachers Academy through, ironically, through comedy. They had reached out to me, said, can you help us get the word out and help us, be a spokesperson. And when I learned about what was happening, I thought, this is CPS and the Board of Ed and the mayor and the city of Chicago trying to push something through without community input. So I know we've got Nikita Brar of Chicago United for Equity and Candace Moore of the Chicago Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights on the line.
Oh, I can hear them.
Okay.
Hi, Candace and Nikita. Your mics should be live.
Hi, this is Candace.
Hi, Candace. It's Samina, and I've got Shauna as well.
Hi, how are you?
And do we have Nikita on the line too?
I'm here. Hi.
Hey, Nikita. It's always great. And Candace, good to meet you, albeit virtually. Hope to meet you in person one day.
Yes.
This is an incredibly exciting case, and I really applaud what you guys did. If we could just, Nikita, if you could give us a little bit more context on how this sort of came about. I gave a little bit of a preview, but if you could do that, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2017, in the spring, myself as a local school council member, the community rep on the LSC, as well as some other parents at the school, started to read WBEZ reporting that said that a school nearby was receiving a little over $60 million in TIF funding, to expand. And we were a little surprised that we hadn't heard about it before. And being that it's in our neighborhood and we're on the local school council, we kind of expected that we would learn about these things from our local elected officials, and we hadn't. So we started to ask more questions and reach out. And lo and behold, before long, what we learned was that, in fact, they were getting this funding. The funding had already been passed through, and it was actually to change the boundaries between these two schools in an effort that would leave our school with only 7 students. And so obviously at that point we realized there was something else going on. There was a longer-term plan. And within a month after we realized that, we pushed pretty hard. And what we found out from Chicago Public Schools was that the intention was to, by that point, when the boundaries were changed and shifted, the school, our school, National Teachers Academy, would be seen on paper as underutilized. And as a result, they would close it down and create a new neighborhood high school in place of our elementary school. So they were planning to strategically starve our community of students to then demonstrate that the school cannot maintain a population and then use that to justify a closure on the books. So we started to organize pretty quickly, and we realized there had been about 2 years worth of planning that Chicago Public Schools had done with the communities adjacent to our neighborhood, without any knowledge and awareness on our communities or any conversation with our community.
And just to remind folks who aren't as familiar with the National Teachers Academy case, this is a level one plus school, which is 80% African American. It's one of the top elementary schools in Chicago, and so to close a top performing school that is majority African American and also has a social justice curriculum, just ironically, so just to give folks that context. Now, Candace, you and Nikita's organization, Chicago United for Equity, Chicago Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights, came together. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened and how the lawsuit came about?
Yeah, so my organization is a nonprofit civil rights organization, and I'm the senior staff attorney on our education equity work. And we had been looking and noticing some of the different issues that were happening across the city around making different kinds of claims for integration or improving diversity with schools. And we were looking at both Ogden and Jenner, and then also took notice of National Teachers Academy. And in particular there, we were hearing a lot of comments from the community that this wasn't right. It didn't seem to add up in very particular ways. And so I went out to a community meeting that Nikita was leading, just really to understand, just to hear what folks were saying. And really that's kind of got the ball rolling. And what we did is we really supported community members being able to engage in the administrative process first. There are opportunities for public comment and public hearing, so really supporting parents and community members to really understand what's at question so that they could speak really in a really targeted way, because in a lot of these hearings you only get 2 minutes, and so you kind of got to make the most of your 2 minutes. So really supporting them in responding in a very targeted way. And then once it was all said and done, and it went to a hearing officer and the decision came out to move forward with the plan, we really looked at what was laid out and said we could bring a lawsuit based on this. And so that's what we did. We brought a lawsuit challenging the closure of National Teachers Academy on 5 different counts. I can go into the counts, but if you want.
Yeah, well, just briefly, I think one of the points was that it was a violation of the Civil Rights Code, and so go ahead.
Yeah. So we had 5 counts total. 4 challenging that or alleging that the district violated the Illinois School Code, so violated its own rules and regulations that promulgated from the school code. And then the 5th one alleging that the district violated the Illinois Civil Rights Act in choosing metrics that really disproportionately disadvantages Black students and Black schools, and sort of making the allegation that it deviates even from how CPS as a district measures performance, really picking some of the metrics that really have the widest racial disparities within them and using that to justify the closing.
Yeah, and can you speak just really briefly? Essentially what happened was earlier this week, the judge granted you an injunction so they couldn't close the school, and then shortly thereafter, CPS sort of abandoned their plans. Can you talk a little, just briefly, about the ruling? Which of the counts did the judge actually say were valid in this case?
Yeah, so when you do a motion for preliminary injunction, the judge essentially has to decide how likely are you to succeed on your claim. So he sort of gives you a preview of what's going to be viable and what's not. At the same time, the district had filed a motion to dismiss, and so under their motion to dismiss, 4 of the 5 counts were dismissed, and those were all the violations of the Illinois School Code. So basically the way those allegations were brought, the judge said there's no grounds for him to intervene, and there's no legal claim here, and so he dismissed the case out, those counts outright. But the one that survived was the allegation that CPS had violated the Illinois Civil Rights Act, and that the way they did this plan was racially discriminatory. So that both survived the motion to dismiss, and then he considered it for the preliminary injunction and granted it, and meaning that the district had to immediately put on a freeze from the plan and could take no further action. And then later on that night, we found out that the district had decided to abandon the plan in total.
Yeah, which is a great victory. And we only have a few seconds, but I just wanted to get a quick sense from both of you. What's next? Is this something that perhaps will be a strategy with future closures, or what are the plans for this coalition?
Yeah, from a legal front, in some ways what we have is fairly limited to the facts of National Teachers Academy. But I think more broadly, it gives us a lot to look at in terms of how do we do school closures in our city, and is there room to improve it?
Great. And WBZ has done some great reporting on this as well. The 200 schools being closed in the last 15 years or so. So clearly something to think as we go forward. And as you said, with future closures or how to evaluate past closures. So I really want to thank both you, Candace and Nikita, for joining us. And congratulations again on a really important win for the community.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye.
So we are going to take a quick break. This is Samina Mustafa. You're listening to the Left. I'm here with Shauna East. We are going to come back and talk to Val Jenks, a therapist. We're going to be talking about toxic political environments and how to deal with holiday depression. We'll be right back. I'm Samina Mustafa.
I'm Shauna East.
We're producing a show on WCPT Sundays at 1 o'clock.
What should we call it?
How about Smash the Patriarchy?
I like it, but that's a lot of pressure. What about left-leaning ladies?
What about woman-splaining?
Yeah, but what about when we have guys on? What about Madigan's worst nightmare?
He gets enough attention.
I got it. To the left.
I like that. That could work.
Tune in to the Left with Samina and Shauna on WCPT 820, Sundays at 1.
Back. Hello, world. You're listening to the Left with Samina and Shauna. Don't forget that you can also watch us on our Facebook page, Facebook Live. And you can like it while you're there, and you can share your comments and questions with us, especially for our guest Val Jenks, right on the live stream. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and you can post on social media with the hashtag #ToTheLeft if you want, TO the left. And our handle is, I think, @#ToTheLeft Radio on everything.
Yeah, it is, actually.
All right, good.
We were consistent. it's amazing.
We snapped it up.
I know. There will never be another @ToTheLeft Radio unless there's like a new social media platform. We just have to like make sure to.
You got to snag it.
Now somebody's got our strategy, our social media strategy.
Oh, they're going to try to sell us the handle for like $5 million.
Yeah, I'm just going to have to go into my savings account for that. So we are back. My name's Samina Mustafa. We're really excited to have our next guest on the show talking about self-care, toxic political work environments, and welcome to Val Jenks.
Hi.
So Val is executive director of Prairie Family Therapy, and just a little context, I met Val through comedy.
Yep.
We were on a show together at Zanies, and realized we were both Asian women in comedy, which is not that common. It's changing, but we are here talking about there's so many things we could have covered in terms of whether it's self-care or anxiety, but we decided to kind of zoom in. But folks who are watching the live stream or want to put some comments in there, we'll check them in the break. You don't have to stick with those topics, but that's where we're going to focus. But I just want to kind of start with the first piece, which is we've got a lot of campaigns that just ended. Mm-hmm. And a lot of campaigns that are still going, and some campaigns that are going to get started because there's municipals in the suburbs too. Right. And the issue that we want to talk about is that there's so much pressure. You've got a very clear deadline, and that a lot of the campaign environments can be really toxic.
Right. Absolutely. One of the things that people who get involved in political campaigns have very strong points of view. They are emotional and bring that with them, and that emotion can translate into passion and can be really successful. The converse of that is that it can also become very toxic, because in emotion, oftentimes we lose sight of sensibilities if the emotion gets to be too much. So we will often see communication breakdown, people taking things personally, assumptions being made, and that can contribute to a very toxic environment being created.
Yeah, and we were talking beforehand, Shauna, you were bringing up just some things that tend to happen, like if you bring up issues and the consequences can be, they're uneven depending on who you are.
Because the campaign is moving so fast, anyone who might bring up any sort of issues that need reflection or review tends to be marginalized or ejected from the campaign.
Yeah.
So, for example, if someone brought up, I'm not getting paid as much as my male counterpart, who can I talk to? That might be something that the higher-ups would see as a threat to, like, the progress of the campaign moving forward, and it could also be a threat to optically for the candidate. Right. So they would figure out some way to marginalize that person or just fire them. So even progressive campaigns have issues where if problems come up, like with sexual harassment or things like that, there's no HR department. It's not like a corporate office where you get the handbook and you're like, oh, okay, here's what I do. Go knock on the HR person's door and file a complaint. It's like you have to talk to typically your male boss, who typically hires people they know. So it might be someone that they even know that is the issue. And there's no real protocol for how to deal with those things. And again, you're not going with the program. You're going against the grain, which is to go forward constantly at a very rapid pace and do the work. And there's no real room for those discussions in campaigns. So that's one way. Another way it can be toxic it's not just like that people have like emotions that are out of control. It's that there's no, there's no structure to campaigns.
There's no guidance, really.
Yeah.
And I think, something we were talking about, too, is a lot of folks who, especially on the progressive side, they might be coming to a campaign for the first time. Generally, campaign staffers are younger, so maybe they haven't had other work environments where they have a comparable situation and they've been sort of mentored or coached, like, this is how you resolve this issue. And again, there may not be somebody on the team who is receptive to that. And so I think a lot of people tend to then feel isolated, or they are in fact isolated. Mm-hmm. So, and how to resolve that?
You bring up the point that it's very time specific. So there's a lot of pressure because there is a specific deadline. We can't extend an election, right? So all of the tasks that the campaign needs to accomplish during that period of time have to go. To your point, Shana, I think when people bring things up, sometimes it's not even. Sometimes it's not even being a naysayer. It just is treated as a distraction away from. Right. The person's point may be very, very valid, mm-hmm. and everybody on that campaign team may agree with them, but it doesn't fit in with the timeline of what needs to get accomplished.
There needs to be like a completely different shift in the culture, I think, of campaigns. Like maybe having more women in campaign manager roles over time maybe might shift that. One campaign manager I know here in Chicago, Rebecca Williams, who actually, is a progressive and wins campaigns. So she actually has some leverage. She just won Fritz Kagi. She won Kim Foxx. So she has an approach where she actually really tries to incorporate progressive values into the structure mm-hmm. of the campaign. So she tries to push to get enough money for benefits for the staff. She allows them a day off a week, things like that. I mean, it's right. rotating, but things like that are unheard of in campaigns. You're expected to work 18 hours a day plus. You're expected to be there all the time. You can't go to a doctor's appointment, or else, again, you're like going right. against the grain. You're causing a problem. Someone needs to cover for you, or something needs to happen.
Well, and part of what you're talking about is inherent in new systems where there isn't a history in place for establishing guidelines. There are some things that, you're talking about just basic things that might come up in a brand new grassroots campaign.
It's essentially a startup. Essentially, that's what you're doing. You're working in a startup, and when folks are under pressure, they tend to say we can't stop. And I think also just if you think about this most recent cycle, we had a big lawsuit come up actually with some Pritzker staffers of color who said that we weren't in an environment that was welcoming to us, and I don't have the complaint in front of me, but it was and it was one of those things where the immediate response from the campaign was, "These are baseless." That was a quote. Mm-hmm. And so that, how do you then feel? Because now it's like you've publicly come out and right. you're so vulnerable already because you're on the campaign, but then it's everybody knows that you're the person who brought something up, and then you're sort of being looked at as, November 6th, what are you doing? You're taking us away from the most important thing. And it's like, what about me?
Well, and isn't that that's a systemic problem, regardless of if this is in a corporate environment or family environment around the holiday table. Right. If somebody comes and meets a complaint with a defensive statement, that's a roadblock that is not going to help to facilitate any conversation or lead to meaningful conversation and agreement.
Right.
And then those folks who came out, they're, good luck trying to find another job.
Yeah.
Because then it will be publicized in a newspaper that this person had a complaint on their last campaign job, and then they go to apply to a new one. They do a simple Google search, and now they know that person's problematic
right.
for campaigns.
And on the other side, the campaign who came back and said, it's baseless, now has put themselves in an immovable position where how can they come back from that and say, well, we actually think that some of those complaints were founded and here's what we're going to do about it. which really, in the long run, is a much stronger position.
Right. And I feel like it's one of those things where, again, if folks felt like that they're basically, if the values that they were pushing in their campaign were values that they practiced in real life, then it would be easier to do that. But again, having been through a campaign, I know it's hard to not feel like everything you're under a microscope. And that people are ready to pounce and attack you for everything and anything, and it's hard not to feel like, oh, I can't make a mistake, or I can't slow down, or I can't take a moment to breathe or take a day off, because it's a hard fixed deadline. It's November 6th. It's the day.
But isn't that exactly where people get tripped up, feeling like they have to have an answer? Right. Rather than taking that pause and saying, let me think about that. Let me consider it thoughtfully. Right. And give you a response that comes from where I believe.
Right. And I think that going back to what we were saying earlier in terms of who's typically on campaign teams, are they folks who have done this many times? Are they thoughtful, like Rebecca is, in terms of building in systems? Do they have kind of the respect of people in the candidates and other people in the community, like other vendors, and saying like, hey, I've done this before, this is how I'm going to run it, and you're going to follow this procedure? Whereas most times people are coming in and saying, I have nobody respects me. I'm just here. I'm a workhorse. I'm a volunteer, and there's no, there isn't a sense of like, oh, this is a person we have to listen to. And there's a hierarchy, even in organizations or campaigns, where the idea is let's be, thinking about dismantling hierarchy, ironically. Right. So
another thing you just brought up was you mentioned volunteers. So in, progressive circles and progressive organizations, campaigns, whatever, we, need people power to power them, because we don't usually have a lot of money. Right. And then volunteers have even less of a system to, of recourse if something does happen, if they're abused in some way, if, again, sexual harassment, like who do they go to? Because they're not even a part of the campaign or the organization staff or... Yeah. So that's another... Yeah, and how much like a volunteer coordinator might be just like the person who's making the phone calls, sending the emails, just getting people to a spot to knock on doors or make phone calls. But again, does that person have the capability or even a pipeline or some way to handle conflict?
And what's that person's ability to set boundaries for themselves and lead by example in that regard too? Right.
Now we get like we clearly, like, both Sean and I have had like experience with this, and obviously it's something that's a huge issue. But we do want to kind of bring it back to, it's December 9th. The holidays have happened or are continuing. We're in holiday season. Right. So if we could kind of transition to that conversation, which is, again, not necessarily political per se, but it is something that really affects all of us, and is something that I'm sure you're seeing in your practice.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think if you open up any social media, any news format on health right now during the holidays, there is an emphasis and acknowledgement that because of the way that things are, the tension that exists in our country, the uncertainty that exists in so many places in our country right now, these holidays seem to be a little bit more challenging than usual. And holidays are challenging, positive or negative.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit of this on the phone earlier this week, but have you sort of since 2016 or in the last couple of years, have you seen a change in how folks come to you in terms of your practice, obviously without revealing any specifics?
Right. Yep. Yes. And also my colleagues. Right. Other therapists are also experiencing the same thing. I'm seeing a lot of peer support groups among my colleagues to deal with some of the pressures. And I'm starting to see articles come out in our professional journals about how, as caregivers, do we take care of ourselves around our own political stress, our own lifestyle stress, our economic stress. And how is that translating in how we show up in the therapy room with our clients? I had mentioned to you earlier this week on the phone that I have seen an increase in people coming in to talk to me around the stress that they're feeling, the uncertainty that they're feeling. They're not feeling like they are comfortable in their own neighborhoods anymore. They can't get together at a block party and really feel like they can relax if they've seen a campaign sign at Joe Smith's house down the street that is diametrically opposite of how they voted.
Yeah.
So we're seeing quite a bit of that.
So you sort of have like a compounding of, you have the holiday season, but then you have all this sort of post-campaign or whatever, sort of maybe hangover or something, and sort of like how do you navigate that, and how do you then come to a holiday season? I know, Shauna, you and I talked about this whole concept of like folks who maybe don't have family.
Yeah, what I wanted to talk to you about is that my family isn't centralized, so I have like sort of a more estranged mom's side of my family, which is all on the East Coast, and I grew up just with my dad here in Illinois, and that's it, just my dad. Mm-hmm. So my dad usually works on Christmas or Thanksgiving because he needs the extra money. They get time and a half. And generally around this time I hear everyone's like, oh, I'm going to travel to meet my family. I'm with like my extended family and we're at a party and we're drinking eggnog and we're doing all this. And, I usually get very depressed around the holidays.
Right.
So how do you help people in that situation?
Well, there was a speaker, I think it was Seth Godin, that I heard once say to keep in mind that we tend to compare our worst day to everybody else's highlight reel. So realistically, people really aren't getting together for that Norman Rockwell eggnog slurping holiday that we've been led to believe by media. Really what it is everybody's a little bit more on edge for these things, even if it's just, is the Jell-O mold going to turn out? I'm half Asian, and there's a Filipino dish called pancit. It's a noodle dish. It's like what chili is to Americans, pancit is to Filipinos. You can cook it in multiple ways, and at Thanksgiving, my cousin volunteered to make the pancit before anybody else, and everybody was like, oh, I'm not sure Jill's going to be able to handle this job. And seriously, she was really unwittingly had taken on quite possibly one of the most challenging jobs there was, because we were all showing up evaluating her pancit, and was it as good as the pancit we would have made, or as good as my 86-year-old mother? So even there's
the great pancit debacle of 2018. Exactly. You guys are hearing it first.
Exactly. And it was quite lovely. It wasn't the way that I would have made it. We enjoyed it. Nobody got food poisoning. But my point is that somebody who isn't getting together for a holiday may look at that situation as, wow, they're getting together and they're having fun and celebrating, but there are all these underlying tensions and judgments and thoughts and emotions that can be happening.
Well, when people say, oh my God, I spent thousands of dollars, I had to get all these gifts, blah, 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 then I feel relieved that I just have my dad, because we don't even do gifts. All we do is go to the movies.
Right. Oh, wait, so no present for me this year?
No. Right. We go to the movies.
That's a joke, guys. I'm not asking for anything.
We go to the movies. We go to a diner that's 24 hours because those are open. And then we go shoot pool at his local bar that's open. And that's our whole holiday.
That sounds lovely.
Right. I know, to you, but to me, I'm looking at your social media like, I want to be...
My family's Muslim, so we ain't doing stuff on Christmas, Shauna. I'm just saying, Northwest Side, Muslims are not doing it. There comes my Northwest Side Edgebrook accent. But no, you're absolutely right. So
we're anti-capitalist, so
so we're not doing it. We're not doing any of that.
I think both of you bring up really good points, and the really good point that I'd like to make today is, what can we each do to allow ourselves to create non-traditional holidays? What's meaningful, and can we allow that to be just as legitimate as that beautiful, spread? Holy cow! I am about to unfriend every single gay man that I have that I'm connected to on Facebook, because there is no way in heck I am going to compete with their holiday spread. They're cooking.
Scott Duff is feeling he's like upset right now. I know
I'm serious.
He is festive AF, as I've noticed on social media,
and I just can't compete with that. I really can't.
You're triggered by that,
and I'm actually upset because I didn't get an invitation to one of the parties. But no. My point here is that we are connected to people on social media, and as I quoted Seth Godin, we are comparing our worst days to everybody else's highlight reel, because nobody posts their worst days on social media.
Right.
So acknowledging that, and then giving ourselves permission to do things that are congruent with who we are. Maybe it isn't about connecting with family at the holidays. Maybe it's about connecting with ourselves. Maybe it's about really focusing on, really reflecting on what's meaningful to me, and what can I do about that? How can I celebrate that? I had an Uber ride the other day with a woman who, she actually drove me a few extra blocks just so we could kind of finish the conversation. But she was really perplexed because she's got a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. She's got teenage stepkids, and she's like, I don't have the money. I'm driving Uber. I don't have the money to get them everything that they want. And I said, maybe for you, it's not about getting the stuff and competing with all of their cousins. Maybe for you, it's providing experiences for them. What are some experiences that you could provide for your children that are going to be meaningful? Because at the end of the day, when I'm in a therapy room listening to somebody's family of origin story, the good ones are rarely about what they got on their 10th Christmas, and always about the trip that they took to Ace Hardware with Dad to get his new saw, or going to ice cream with Grandma. So really approaching the holidays, giving ourselves permission to approach the holidays in a non-traditional way that's meaningful to us is important.
Yeah, that's great. So we need to take a quick break.
And then I'll tell you about my non-traditional holiday I've planned when we get back.
This is To the Left with Samina and Shana. I'm Samina Mustafa, and you can watch us on Facebook Live and leave a comment there. We'll be right back. I'm Samina Mustafa.
I'm Shauna East.
We're producing a show on WCPT Sundays at 1 o'clock.
What should we call it?
How about Smash the Patriarchy?
I like it, but that's a lot of pressure. What about left-leaning ladies?
What about woman-splaining?
Yeah, but what about when we have guys on? What about Madigan's Worst Nightmare?
He gets enough attention.
I got it. To the left.
I like that. That could work.
Tune in To the Left with Samina and Shauna on WCPT 820, Sundays at 1.
Welcome back. It's To the Left with Samina and Shauna. I am Shauna East. Who are you?
I'm Samina Mustafa. It is I. I'm being very, very dramatic on Facebook Live, but you can't hear that because it's silent. And we have Val Jenks, Executive Director of Prairie Family Therapy. We are talking about dealing with holiday stress and depression, and we were talking earlier about political campaigns, but Shauna was going to get ready to tell us how she copes with the holidays.
In the spirit, well, typically I would just be sad and mopey and laying around, but I have learned my lesson, and this month I have decided to do some self-care by, during the week I usually go to like political events after work almost every day. Instead of doing that, I am working on my resume and doing things that are going to help me, because I'm terrible at, documenting what it is that I do and trying to like put myself out there. And I just wanted to say, I know Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is one of our listeners, and I wanted to say I applied for you this week, and please look at my resume. I worked for a really long time on the cover letter. So
Alex,
please,
if you're listening,
please, I'm the whole package.
Well, that's a really important point that Shauna brings up, which is taking the time to not always be there for other folks and take time for yourself.
Because I'm always volunteering and doing things and helping others, like to my own expense.
Right.
So at my own detriment. So
Yeah.
I thought I'm going to just work on this and lay under blankets and do my resume. And then Christmas Eve, this is the second year in a row, I'm going to my former intern's family party, which is half Latinx, half Jewish soiree in River Forest, and it's like this big blowout party, and they're there till like 2 a.m, like opening gifts and the white elephant and all these wacky decoration or ornament exchange, and
really? Well,
there's
fun.
3 rooms of food and drinks, and they all think I'm his girlfriend even though he's like 19. So that's really funny.
So there's your family drama.
So that
She's got Ponset,
my former intern Jimmy has adopted me as like one of their family, and then on Christmas Day I'm going to the movies with my dad and probably playing pool like I just told you, and then at night I'm going to Sheila Garland O'Lanaran's house for Christmas dinner.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah,
That's
so
lovely.
I packed it full of stuff to do so I can't be sad, and it'll be great. It sounds,
Yeah.
I'm psyched actually.
And Sheila's going to be on our show on the 30th of this month, so that'll be really exciting. But getting back to our conversation with Val Jenks of Prairie Family Therapy, so that's Shauna's got a great prescription. What's your intern's name? How big is the house?
It's very big. It's
What's
like,
that address?
I know that could be a solution
well,
for
write
many
me
of our
on Facebook and I'll see if you don't have anything to do. I'll see what I can do.
We are trying to help people out here. We're a public service here. But we were going to get back to Val and just kind of getting back to the conversation, but also plug a few of your projects.
So, before I plug my projects, I really, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking also about the meaning of the holidays being equated to community and connecting with others. And there are a lot of people who do not have a readily available way of connecting with other people. And that is one of the biggest contributors, I think, to holiday stress is I don't want to be alone. I have a couple of suggestions for those people. One is, if you don't want to be alone, are there some deliberate steps that you can put in place? Look at what's going on in your community on those holiday days when everything else is closed. Are there places that you can volunteer? Are there ways that you can celebrate? And here is where social media really is a beautiful thing. Social media can allow people to feel like they're connecting. Sending out some notes on Christmas Eve to people who have been meaningful to you. Calling people on the phone. Holy cow, when was the last time that you ever had, called somebody on the phone and had a meaningful conversation? Personally, I avoid phone calls all the time. Why? Because I'm like, I don't have time for that. Well, Christmas Eve is a perfect time. The holidays are a perfect time to make time for a 45-minute call to your college roommate or, an old relative that you haven't seen in a while. And the other thing that I would suggest is that people also be okay with being by themselves on a holiday. but plan for it. The hardest thing is when you find yourself by yourself and you feel like it's your default position, that this is the concession to not having people. If you plan for that time to yourself, like you were saying about really going under the covers and really working on that resume by yourself, and plan for those things. I remember one holiday when I was going to be by myself, and I planned a Harry Potter marathon, and that's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
And that was, I made sure that I had the food that I was going to eat and treated myself. And then when the rest of the world came out from their eggnog comas on the next day, I was ready to reconvene with them. So,
yeah. And I do want to kind of get back to one of the things that just kind of connected us, which is performing. And that you are still doing storytelling, and you do quite a bit of public speaking. But one of the things I think, is it coming up? I saw you post something about Laughing Matters in Chicago.
Yes.
So tell us about that and when the next date is.
So from my comedy experience, I was meeting a lot of people who were recovering from mental illness or addiction, and really struggling with having a full-time job and performing at open mics and showcases that really don't pay anything that they could live on, but needing to get that experience. Very talented comedians. So a few of us started a not-for-profit organization called Laughing Matters in Chicago, and we provide performance opportunities and scholarship to people who have been impacted by mental illness or addiction. We have a show coming up at the end of March. I'm blanking on the dates. I'll get those to you to post on the website later. But at the end of March, we'll be doing our second show of prescription comedy at Judy's Beat Lounge at the Second City Training Center. And we're casting right now. So if anybody's interested, they can go to laughingmattersinchicago.com and find more information.
That's great. That's a way to use kind of like your skills as a storyteller and performer, and also your background as a therapist, and really say, like, how can we use art to heal?
And these comedians are hilarious. They're so talented and just wonderful people, and just hilarious.
Yeah, great. Well, Leah, definitely keep us posted on the date. And then Shauna, you and I are going to wrap up because, oh my God, it's another hour has evaporated in WCPT land.
So I just want to say my thank yous. I wanted to say thank you to Ms. Lady B.
Yes.
Our producer in the studio.
Yay.
Oh, hold on. Oh, here's the mouse. Hold on.
We're going to hear us. Oh.
Wow.
We've done all the sound effects.
And then I wanted to say thank you to Valerie Jenks for being on, and Nikita Brar, Candace Moore, to Jackrabbit for helping. He's been helping us all the time with stuff, and to those who are at home amplifying our show on social media. And I wanted to say yet again that we need to raise the dough to pay for the airtime. So please consider being a very low level monthly supporter, or high level if you have the money.
Right.
Our airtime here is brokered. We have to pay for it ahead of each broadcast, and we can't do this show without your support. So please find us on Patreon, To the Left Radio, and you can also send us money through Venmo and PayPal and all of these other things to help us out.
We will take your money.
Yes, we need it. And then I just wanted to give a shout out to the iconic Black Panther exhibit that is at Stony Island Arts Bank, which is at 6760 South Stony Island. I went there to see The Murder of Fred Hampton the other night, and I was there an hour early. There was a line out of the door. The whole place was overflowed. They had like 4 extra screenings on. So many people were coming out to hear his story. I was just like, wow, this is amazing. And there's a bunch of art and stuff related to the Black Panther Party there. So definitely check that out. And, I have a quick call to action. I call on Chicago's journalists and members of the media like us, because now we're members of the media. Am I right?
Yeah, we are.
I would like us to consider to fact check our municipal candidates because there is somewhat of a revision of history going on that I would like to challenge the media and our journalists to fact check.
We need
do some reporting.
Journalists. There's some journalists who do their job very well and do the fact checking and actually do the research and are very thorough about it. There's some really great nonprofit journalists at, say, ProPublica and City Bureau. They're doing a great job of uncovering some of the stuff that never gets covered. So, but yes, that needs to happen in real time. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be hearing from a lot of candidates. I do want to do a quick preview of what's going on our show next week. We are going to have Robert Naiman of Just Foreign Policy talking about Yemen. That's a really important issue, and I know a lot of folks don't have a lot of information or are a little unclear on the proxy war that's been going on that Saudi Arabia has been waging there. And obviously, it came to the forefront because of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, which is kind of created more attention. Sadly, it took such a brutal killing to do that, but we are going to have Robert in studio. And then after that, we're going to be talking about cannabis, right? Is that the next week?
Yeah. I don't know. I can only take things one day at a time, Samina. Yeah. You're asking for a lot here.
Okay. We're going to talk about
But I believe the next week perhaps is about cannabis,
just
legalization and criminal justice reform.
I'm bringing that up to say, how many shows on the radio do you have that are going from Yemen to cannabis, to criminal justice, to sexual harassment and Me Too, and
mental health
and school closures. I'm just
throw
saying.
Us a couple bucks, skip the Reese's king-size peanut butter cups, or not, and just throw us $2 a month.
Okay.
Think about it.
So here we are. We're at the end of the show. My name's Samina Mustafa.
I'm Shauna East.
And this is To the Left. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks.
The preceding program, To the Left, was sponsored by To the Left Media, LLC, and to the extent applicable, their guests. The views and opinions expressed therein do not necessarily reflect those of NewsWeb Radio Company or its management.
Democratic lawmaker says of accusations that President Trump